one. I see na kaila, right? And so in Haiti, when we show up in somebody's space, we always say one, right? And the response is respect, just like she said. And that's how we know, like I know there are Haitians here, right? And so what is the purpose of that? So we show up in a space, you're gonna go into somebody's home, you're gonna go into the laku, right? Because most of when you show up in somebody's space, it's not like you're knocking on a door. It's like everybody's out, right? So you would walk in and you would say, one, which means I will honor you. That's what one means. And then the person's response is respect, which means I will respect you. It means we will honor each other and we will respect each other in that space. Okay? So we're going to try a little Creole this morning, right? So I'm going to say one, and then you're going to say respect. Okay? One. Really good, right? So really, and usually if you walk into somebody's laku and you say one and you don't hear anything, go home. Like, they're not ready for you. Right? Overall. So really, really excited. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come. It's my first time coming to Kentucky. So to be here, so I was really, really excited for the opportunity. But I was particularly excited to hear about this competition where they're using a case as it pertains to IET. I just couldn't miss an opportunity to actually be a part of that. And so even though I'm flying in and flying out tomorrow because we have a huge event specifically planned for IET tomorrow in Miami, I just couldn't miss the opportunity to be with all of you. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to be a part of that. So I called my mother, because we always want to know where I am. I don't know if you have those mothers too. But, in my mother's eyes, at 63 years old, I'm still a child. She likes to know everywhere I'm going, when I'm coming back, right, and so forth. And if she can't find me, she called my oldest, who's 28 years old, and said, can you tell me where my child is, right? So I called my mother and I said, Mom, just so you know, I'm going to Kentucky, right? I'll be back on Saturday. And she's like, oh, I think you're going to be the only Haitian there. Like, are you sure you should be going to Kentucky where you're going to be the only Haitian there? I was like, oh, let me look this up. I look it up, and it turns out that there's 1,975 Haitians in Kentucky, so I'm good. So according to my mother, then I'm able to be able to, go as a result of that. But it's just an opportunity to say that clearly even here in Kentucky, there's a Haitian community. And oftentimes we don't really know the kind of people that are around us unless something is popping up, right? So the fact that you have a case that is centering around IET forces us to think about, well, who are the Haitians in Kentucky? Where are the churches? Where are the people who are doing that particular work as well? So I want to start off a little bit, telling a little bit what is the purpose of this particular presentation. I know you heard a little bit. I go to IET once a month, born and raised in IET. I'm there once a month, just came back 2 weeks ago. I'll be back in IET next Friday, right, as well. I'm home once a month for the last 29 years. Right? And then twice a year, I go there particularly for the work. And then twice a year, I'm there with my kids and my family, right? So my siblings, who are much, older now, were born in the States. My kids were born in the States, but home is home for me. And it's important to introduce them and make sure that they are connected to home. So twice a year, we go home. Right after the holidays for Christmas, we are home, and also in August, we're back at home. It's an opportunity for me to be able to expose them to the country as well. So a lot of the things that I'm going to share with you are not things that I'm like actually pulling from a book. These are things that we are doing based on our lived experience in IET and the work that we are doing there as well. So I want to make sure to do that, but I know that you have an amazing challenge around you right now with respect to the case. I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time to ensure that you can ask some questions, because this year you're going to kick some. Can't say the word, but you got me, right? In terms of the competition. So we want to make sure that you're ready, right, to do so. So excited to do so. So this is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to share with you a little bit about some of those sort of untold stories of things that you probably need to know as you're really looking at this particular case and thinking about the larger issues, and talk a little bit around some of the ways to think that through in terms of the work that you are all doing. And then I'm going to leave you plenty of time to move us forward, okay? So let me start off by one thing, which is the name, right? So how many of you knew that IET's name is spelled this way? right? It's IET, right? So think about, like, look at my face for a moment when I say IET versus when I say Haiti. You see the difference? Like there's no way you cannot get happy when you say IET versus when you say Haiti. But let's talk a little bit about why the name was changed. IET is the name of the country. It was the name of the country given by the indigenous people, the Taínos of the country, right, of the whole entire island is known as IET, right? Now that name was changed, and it means mountainous land. That's what it means, right? And that name was changed through this colonization process, where our name was changed to IET with an H, right? Now you may ask yourself, well, why would they change the name from IET to Haiti with an H? Well, it turns out that if you keep the name as it is written, it will always be listed as one of the top 10 countries in the world, because alphabetically, because of how it's spelled, right? And because of colonization, there's no way France was going to allow us to be one of the top named countries in the world. So it was changed to an H, H-A-I, right? Because then it would force us to go after France. Think about that for a moment, where you change the whole entire name of a country, right, as a result of, and what does that look like in terms of the importance of naming, in terms of identity, right, and so forth. So now when Haiti gained its independence, the Jean-Jacques Dessalines, I don't know how many of you knew, yesterday was a holiday for us in Haiti. October 17 is Jean-Jacques Dessalines' holiday. Jean-Jacques Dessalines is the first emperor of Haiti. It's a national holiday for us. It is the first person who was assassinated in Haiti, was the first emperor of Haiti at that time. But when we gained our independence, Jean-Jacques Dessalines renamed the country with an H-A-Y-T-I. So you'll see that spelling as well of the country, H-A-Y-T-I. Now there are 8 towns in the United States called Haiti with an H-A-Y-T-I, right, as well, and they're predominantly black communities in the U.S. that were thriving black communities who saw the need to call themselves Haiti with an H-A-Y-T-I, right? So it's good to like be able to know that now. We used to think that we were special, right, in terms of like why, like somehow we're the only people that this happened to us. And so like whenever I talk about it, people are like, oh, join the crowd, right? So Puerto Rico is not named Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's name of the country is Boricua, right? But then they renamed it Puerto Rico, which literally translates, it's a Spanish word that translates to rich port, because economically, that's where the ships were coming for the purpose of vitality, and then they renamed the country from Boricua to Puerto Rico. Try Philippines, same thing, right? So there's many, like Philippines was named after the kings who renamed the country after his son, Philip, right, and so on. So there's tons of those things, and I say that because it is important as you're looking at this case and we're thinking about people. Identity matters, name matters, where I'm from matters, right, and my connection to history matters in terms of that. And so paying attention to what has happened to somebody when your whole entire identity has been changed from your name, right, overall. Now, how many of you been to Haiti? Okay, 3, right? So here's Haiti, right? So just to give you a sense of the country. So this is a country that has 10 departments, right? It has 42 districts, 145 communes, and it has 575 section communal. It is a population of about 12 million people, which is half the size of Florida, right? And so on. Now, every single time you hear somebody talk about Haiti, you hear this area. See this area right here? It's one area of the country, Port-au-Prince. So, and it's really easy for you to tell Haiti. Every time people are like, can you tell me about Haiti? I was like, take your fingers, goes like this, and that's Haiti. Right? You put it like that, that's Haiti, right? So we are like one of the few people, like whatever happens in Port-au-Prince becomes the news of the whole entire country. Right? You hardly ever hear somebody say, let me talk about Lekai or Ilavache, or let me talk about, like the Grand Danse area, right? It's like whatever happens here, small rural community in Haiti becomes the whole entirety of the country. So when I'm going to Haiti, people say, oh, you're going to Haiti, it's so dangerous. I was like, Port-au-Prince is dangerous. Not a whole entire country is dangerous. So imagine for a moment, like if nobody came to the United States because of what's happening in Chicago. Did you see the murder rate in Chicago for last year? Right? So imagine if we say it doesn't even come close to the homicide rate in Haiti and the whole entire country, right? And so on. But imagine for a moment if somebody said, are you going to the United States of America, given what's happening in one area? Right? And so how do we become like a single story based on something that is happening in one particular area? So I put that slide there because it is going to be important as you're looking at this particular case, because where this person is from now may not be where they're from in country. So while they may be going to Port-au-Prince because most of everything has been centralized in this rural community, that's what Port-au-Prince is. It's a rural community that is supposed to house no more than 2,000 people, that now has literally 3 million people is in this little small rural community, right? But most likely, the person that you are examining is actually from a place up north. The whole family is from a place up north. Or they may be from a place down south. They just in Port-au-Prince for the purpose of work or study, right? And so this means like it's like migrating. It's like you coming from Kentucky to Miami, right? For the purpose of school and work and so forth. But who you are from Kentucky still matters, right? In a significant way. So it's really good as you're thinking about the case to think and situate that around the larger country and not simply looking at it in one particular area as well. Questions or thoughts about that before I move on? No? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the context. I will give you a quick little bit of a context of Haiti, which you may know because it's like, how do I go beyond the sort of the images in the news that we oftentimes see about Haiti, right? So most people don't know that the landscape, first of all, that the island of Haiti, Hispaniola, is one island, right, called Haiti. When we declare freedom, we declared it freedom for the whole entire island, right? And so while the DR, the Dominican Republic, gained its independence from Haiti, right? Overall, we as an entity don't have issues with the people who are embodying the same island as us, right? But there's a way that the international community step in and create that level of conflict like we're seeing now, right, in terms of the DR and the Haiti news, that leads itself to feel like there's a conflict between us, when in fact, oftentimes there really isn't, right? But it's really been orchestrated, right? So that's going to be important to kind of keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind when we're talking about the sort of social and political piece in Haiti is the impact of the interventions that have taken place in Haiti. And let's just really, since I'm in the United States of America, if I was in Canada, I would be doing the Canada intervention. But let's go back a little bit to the 1945 occupations in Haiti. How many of you knew that Haiti was occupied by the United States of America? Right? So think about that for a moment. I love the hands raising, right? That's a really great, right? And so occupied the country for a significant period of time. And that has had huge implication for what that has meant in the country, right, over the years. So think about that for a moment, because my grandmother, right, my grandmother who is, who's now, she's 101 years old, right, at this particular moment, grew up at the time when that occupation took place, right, and what that looked like, what is the impact of that has been over the years. And so for the most part, and the reason I'm mentioning that social political landscape, and I'm not going to even start with the issue of colonization and slavery, because it will take us too long to talk about that. But it is important to think about the historical trauma that have come in as a result of colonization and slavery and so forth on the island as well. Like, you can't look at a case and not think about the transgenerational trauma that have taken place. And all of you are in the field knows very well that the epigenetic folks are telling us that, in fact, we know for sure that trauma has a way of transforming genes, right, from one generation to the other. So whatever happened to your grandmother has had an effect on in changing your genes overall now. So it then makes sense that whatever's happening for our grandparents would have had its huge impact right, on the people on this island right now as well. So the social political piece is really important. I think it's good to situate that within that. The other piece I want to mention really quickly in terms of the context is the gender piece, the gender disparities that exist in the country. Now, Haiti is mostly a patriarchal society for the most part, but it is governed and run and function. It survives because of the women, right overall. So next year, April 10th, is our 75th anniversary of the first Haitian Women Congress. So this is a country that's been free for 226 years, has been independent nation, but the first Women Congress is 75 years old, right? And so it tells you the sort of the role that women have played, right, historically in the nation. And that Congress led to the right for Haitian women to vote at the national election, because women were not able to vote. We could vote in mayors and districts and so forth, but we couldn't vote at the national, right, at the presidential election as a group. But having said that, Haiti is the only and the first country to have had a woman president, right, in the Americas, right, as well, with Pascal Trouillot, right, as well. So it's not to say that there hasn't been women leaders and women who can serve at those particular positions. It just has been significant disparities as well, right? I want to talk a little bit around the sort of this political landscape, because the reason why you would have a case in front of you that you get a chance to examine, the reason why we'll be talking about Port-au-Prince is because of this social political landscape that I think is important to kind of interrogate a little bit, right? And I don't know if many of you saw, and hopefully you did because you have this case in front of you, so the New York Times article that was published on the ransom. Anybody saw that? If you didn't, please do. Like, look it up, right? It's a New York Times article, and it talks about the ransom debt. It is the very first time the New York Times ran a whole article around just the social, political, historical aspects of Haiti and ways that these historical have impacted the economic of the country, and they ran it both in English and Haitian Creole, right? So that you can get it in both languages as well. So why was that reason for that? Is because if you look at both the role that the United States plays in terms of Haiti and the role that France played in Haiti post this independence. So you're thinking about a country that gained its independence in 1804, and then shortly after that, France came back, right? So you gain your independence in 1804, the emperor is assassinated, right? And then you find yourself in a vulnerable place. France come back with a set of army and force the leadership of the country to agree to pay France money for its independence. Are you following me? Imagine what that looks like, right? Where somebody says, in order for us to not come back, right, and cause harm in your land, we're asking you to pay us back. And IT paid. The leadership of the country paid every year, France, a certain level of money in order to ensure that they would not invade and come back and invade the island again. People didn't realize the significance of that debt until the 2010 earthquake, right? When it became known that, in fact, IT was paying France this debt. So then there's a team of people who calculated what economically would be, what the cost of that would be, for France to repay that, right? And that's what the New York Times article is all about, called ransom, right? As well, that might be helpful to look at. So this political piece is important. The other thing I'll mention very quickly that is connected to this social political piece is the role that particularly political groups here in the United States plays in terms of Haiti. Let me give you two examples, right, to help situate that. So Haiti was always known for its agricultural capability. We were number one on exporting coffee. We were number one in exporting plantains, abaca, other fruits, and so forth, right? Really, really big piece for us. And so the United States, right after the U.S. occupation, put in a law that is in place called the Agricultural Act. You can look it up. The Agricultural Act prevented Haiti from exporting and trading, it's good from Haiti to the United States, right? So what is the larger impact of that? Because the way the United States work is, if I'm not friends with you, none of my friends should be friends with you. It's like high school. Remember those time where you're like, you know, like, if you mess up with my buddy, then you mess up with me. And if I'm not talking to you, then none of my friends are talking to you, right? It's sort of set up that way in terms of, that's why it's called allies nations, right? And so not only that Haitians could not export its good to the United States, it couldn't do that to other countries that are allies of the United States as well. Now, like, what is the significance of that? Haiti has 370 different types of mangoes. Imagine that for a moment. Anybody know mangoes? I'm talking about mangoes, a little bit like, not really. Mangoes, right? 270 mangoes. So you can't say, I don't like a Haitian mango, because there's no way you've tasted all 370. We have 178 different types of avocados, right? In the country as well, and so on. So imagine the inability for you to be able to export what is it that you're producing and be able to sell it in other places. So imagine what would that look like in China if China wasn't able to export what China produced in other places, what would happen economically to that nation. So nations absolutely need to be able to do things economically, and if so, it's going to have a huge impact on them in terms of that, right? So that's one. The second thing that to keep in mind is the rice piece. Now, you know, many people in the United States love Bill Clinton. They refer to Bill Clinton as a first black president and so forth. Bill Clinton has a really hate relationship in Haiti. Right? Like, we have a hate relationship with the Clintons overall. And like, why is that? Right? Why is that relationship there? Because Bill Clinton is the first president who put in a law in place regarding rice in Haiti, right? So that one product that we were able to import, right, export outside of the country was rice, right? So it's not the inability to transport rice that became a factor in the country. Is the fact that Bill Clinton introduced Arkansas rice on the island as an aid to Haiti. Ever heard the thing, people say, well, Haiti is so poor, we need to feed it, right? So we're gonna send food to the poorest country because we can feed it. But this is a country that's also producing its own food, right? So it clearly doesn't need food to be imported in country for it, right? But Arkansas rice wasn't important. And it was important for Bill Clinton to do so as a man from Arkansas, because the Arkansas farmers needed to sell their rice. So the United States bought the rice from them and then shipped them to Haiti, where it's producing rice, right? And so they shipped the rice to Haiti and then start selling it in the market at Haiti 80% cheaper than the local rice. What does that do to the local rice? Decimate it, right? Destroy it, right? And so on. So now economically, you don't have the ability to be able to not only produce your own, but also to be able to, you know, have it in country as well, right? All of these things has huge economic impact on the country. And when you have a nation that is not able to economically thrive, it's going to have an impact on its people. It's going to have an impact on its young, and people are going to look to leave, to go look for opportunities. So people don't leave Haiti because they are dying to come to the United States or Canada or other places. And that's what we would want, that I naturally choose to leave my country to go to another place. People leave the country to look for other opportunities, right? But we have to ask ourselves, but why would they be looking for other opportunities? So when people say, what is going on in Haiti that you guys can't get this together, right? And so on. And so whenever people say that, I said, you have to force yourself to ask the question, when you see two crabs in a barrel that's crawling and trying to get out of this barrel, and one is crawling after the other, right? This concept that we see in this image that we see all the time, we have to ask ourselves, not what's wrong with the crabs in the barrel, but who put the crabs in the barrel to begin with? Because crabs don't belong in a barrel. Crabs belong in lovely bodies of water so that they can freely go about the country, right? So who puts them there that would force them to actually be calling on each other to try to survive? right, within that process. And we have to ask ourselves these questions as it pertains to IT, right, in this way, right? So I'm going to stop here to see if there's any questions about that, any reactions to what I've said. Any part of it that doesn't make sense? Am I boring you? Okay, good. Okay, good. Okay. So now let's add from this economic piece that I'm just talking about, and then let's throw in a slew of environmental factors on top of that, right? So now you have earthquakes. The earthquake in Haiti, the 2010 earthquake, was devastating, not because we never had earthquake in Haiti. We've had earthquakes in Haiti before. The earthquake in Haiti was devastating because we shouldn't have 3 million people in Port-au-Prince, right? And so the fact that we had that many people in Port-au-Prince, the fact that you have that kind of structure in that space leads to the kind of destruction that we are seeing. So this is also a place, exactly because of where it's located in the map, that is prone to, hurricanes and earthquakes. Hurricanes and earthquakes will continue to happen in Haiti. Without a doubt, these are going to be significant factors that are there. And so on top of a place that doesn't have the economic opportunities, and remember, this is a country that is not really big on tourism either, and I'm incredibly grateful for some of the things that we have imported in the country. We do not have a McDonald's, we do not have a Starbucks, we do not have a Burger King, we don't have those things, right, in the country as well. But it means that we don't have a tourism that's actually helping offset this economic piece that we are seeing. But then you add these environmental challenges on top of that, then it's really hard for you to bounce back, right, from these experiences if in fact there's no structure to be able to do so. So it's clear that all of these things are going to impact, right, an individual, right? And it's going to be really important as we're looking at any particular person that we are forced to kind of look at it to these particular lens. Like, we have to ask the questions. We have to ask the questions of who is this person? Where are they from? Where is their family from? Where did they come from? What are the things that they were exposed to? Did any of the family members were impacted by earthquake or hurricane, right, and so forth? You have to ask those questions as a central part of this case, right? Because whether or not this person is telling you their story, they might all have a story that is related to this experience. And we don't even have to talk about the migration piece, right, a bit. So I know I'm going to run out of time very soon, so I want to make sure to leave time for you to ask your questions as well, right? Talking a little bit about the gender disparity piece, and my friend who's here who says, so I know there's a Haitian person here, right? We know that the significant role that women has played in ways that we confine ourselves as a society, and the role that we think that women can and cannot do, right, and so forth. My brother was born in the United States of America, grew up in a Haitian household. When Kevin was like 14 years old, we're like, Kevin, you have to do dishes today. He says, no, I don't do dishes, sis. I said, I'm sorry? Did you eat? He says, no, I don't do dishes. I said, what do you mean you don't do dishes? He's like, oh, no, Asian boy, we don't do dishes. Boys don't do dishes. I said, where do you learn that? Like, how are you raised in a woman household that you're learning that men don't do this? But it was really clear in terms of what he's observing, that there are some things that we ask the men to do, and then there are other things that the women do. So we have this sort of ways that we are confined by gender. So there are some things that a person may say as you're looking at this particular case, that what you might be thinking of course she can go and do X, Y, and Z, but there may be some limitations and ways that gender socialization has played a central role, right, in terms of what one can and cannot do, right, economically. And then the last place is just really the participation in decision making, that in terms of ways that impacts that as well, right? So because we're of gender and gender socialization, women haven't been really schooled and socialized in the kind of ways that we need to make decisions at a system and structural level, which is also important. We talked a little bit about some of those challenges, right, that we are seeing, the high employment rate that exists in the country, the limited access to healthcare. And let me just say, until about 10 years ago, Haiti was low on all health indices. Let me just be very clear on that. The cancer rate in Haiti was 3%, right? The hypertension rate in Haiti was 6%, right? The diabetes rate in Haiti was 15%. Fast forward to now, that rate is incredible, right? So our cancer rate in Haiti right now is 23%, right? Our diabetes rate is like 30-something%. Hypertension is also off the roof. So we've seen a dramatic change also in that, right? So doesn't that try your mind? It's like, why? Why is that? Like, what's going on? Okay, keep chewing on that for a moment, right? Like, why would that be the case? Why are we seeing such a shift in terms of the access to care and so on, right? The other thing that we are seeing is the educational opportunities we have to pay attention to. Talked a little bit about the challenges already. Let's talk a little bit around some of the specific challenges that we are seeing for women and girls, in particular on the country as well, right? Gender violence, which you've probably heard, there's no way we can't ignore that, right? So as we're hearing about the gang situations, not just in Port-au-Prince, but also the issue about sexual and physical sexual abuse has been real in the country, right? In addition to that, we're seeing a rate of women who have been, and children who have been sexually exploited in the country, particularly girls exploited for missionary work. I know you've seen those cases in the news of missionaries that are now going, like there are cases against, just recently, a missionary who was found to sexually assault about 20-something girls. Missionaries going to Haiti to do good work end up sexually, assaulting. We see that with the United Nations, right, deployment. Every time we have United Nations deployment in Haiti, we get concerned, right, about the rate of sexual violence that is about to happen in country as well, because you're literally asking people from other nations to come in this country, be there for a significant period of time, and you don't believe that there's going to be some sexual assault also taking place, right? But then there's no opportunity to bring them up in charges against that, right, as well. So the sexual assault is not just because of people in the country, but it's also because of the interference that we are seeing as well, right? The economic challenges are there. So I'm just relisting for you, like as you're looking at this particular case and you're like, how should I lens? What is the lens I should be using to help me make sense of what may be going on with this particular person, right? That I'm forced to kind of think through a little bit about what we need to do for them. And so these are the key things that you have to ask questions about. I want to talk a little bit about the mental health and well-being that is associated with all of that. There's no way everything I just said, you can't take a look at that and say, how am I situating this person in terms of their overall mental well-being? Let me be very clear, when I'm talking about mental well-being, I'm talking about mental well-being, not mental illness, right? There's a way that sometimes when we talk about mental health, we start talking about illnesses. I'm really talking about bien-être l'esprit, right? My overall wellness, and everything we know impacts one's wellness. That's not going to be a surprise to you. Of course, if you can't feed yourself today, it's going to impact your mental state. Of course, if you don't have a place to sleep tonight, it's going to impact your mental state. Of course, if you have to move from one place to another, it's going to impact your mental state. Right? So it's all those things that is having a significant impact on the mental well-being of our girls and women in the area. So really making sure that and I should say that we do have a number of people in country, because we have a Haitian Psychological Association, despite the fact that most people thought after the earthquake we didn't have any psychologists in country, because the New York Times published an article that says we had 2 psychologists in the country after the earthquake, and then that bring everybody to Haiti, right, to provide mental health care to people in the country. We do have 176 licensed registered psychologists in the country, and in addition to a number of psychiatric nurses as well. So we do have some individuals in there, but we only have 2 hospitals, psychiatric hospitals in country, right, as well, to address the larger need. One of them is the Bidet Hospital, and the Bidet Hospital was a hospital that was created by a pharmacology company that is here in the state, that was using Haiti and Haitians in Haiti as a testing laboratory ground for the testing of pharmacological drugs in Haiti. And when that was discovered, they created a hospital to help deal with, the impact of all of that, right? So, but both hospitals are in Port-au-Prince, right? So they're not really outside of the outskirts for that. And clearly the other piece is just the stigma and the cultural barriers that also exist in terms of really being able to address some of these things. Again, I'm saying that because when the person shows up to you, you see in this particular case, people can have all kinds of issues that are going on for them mentally. We just don't show up looking like something is wrong with us. Like, we're very good at showing up, smiling, and acting as if everything is good when in fact we're not good. Right? So you can't really use my look today, right? And say, okay, she must be okay, right? Because as I am trained, I'm trained as a Haitian woman to show up. It turns out I'm not just a black women are trained to show up looking and smelling good, even though we're not okay, right? In some instances. So it is, and part of that is because of the barriers, right? And stigma that is associated with that, right? But on top of that, is the cultural piece that is also connected with the way that we think about mental health, right? That is also part of that. What is my overall health belief model in terms of the ways that I think about what is happening to me, right? It turns out that that we have a way of conceptualizing our own, like, make sense of what is happening to somebody. So if I'm depressed, which is not a word in Creole, we don't have a word called depression in Creole. We don't have a word that's called trauma on Creole, right? Those are really westernized terms, and if I use any of that, it would be like using a French term, which is not a word that means anything to anybody. Let me give you an example of that. So if I was to talk to somebody about anxiety, how would I say anxiety in Haitian Creole? Right? So if let's say in French, how would I say anxiety in French? Anxiété, right? So if I were to say anxiety in French, I would say, oh, I'm here to talk about anxiété, anxiety, right? But if I were to try to translate that into Haitian Creole, it would be qu'est-ce bisquette. See it? Qu'est-ce bisquette, which means my heart is overly fluttering. See the distinction? So, and all of us who've had anxiety symptoms know where we feel it. We feel it in the heart, right? And so the proper way is to say, qu'est-ce bisquette, right? So imagine for a moment, I say to you that I have qu'est-ce bisquette, and then you say you're about to do something with my head. Would that make any sense? None whatsoever, right? Because it's not my head is the problem. It's my heart. That's the problem, because that's where my symptoms are, right? So we know that there are all of those things, right, that is there in terms of the way that we think about mental health, the way that we think about what's happening to us, and that may not necessarily is linked to the way that the westernized world think about certain things, right? Connected to that is our own belief about how we see things. Now, all of us here knows exactly how the common cold gets transmitted, right? Are we clear? Like it's a virus, right? That there's good scientific data on it, right, and so on. So why would your parents want you to put a coat on? When you go outside and it's freezing and somebody say you need to put a coat on, and what does your parents say? You need to put a coat on for what purpose? Because you want to catch a cold. You're like, so you know, I'm talking about like, you know, like talented scientists, people who know, and then you said to your kid, I'm sorry, but you cannot go outside without a coat on because you're going to catch a cold. But we know very well that the cold is not caught that way. That's health belief. That is a belief system that the person have about how is it that they see things. It doesn't make a difference what you say to me about your scientific data. There's nothing I can say to my mother about the idea of me washing my hair and going outside when it's cold. It is a guarantee that I'm about to catch a cold because I washed my hair and I went outside. Now, I can tell her all I want to say about the fact that, Mom, according to the scientific data, you know, like that's not the way that the cold happened. The moment I start sniffling, you're like, you see, I told you, right? Like you shouldn't do that. In part because we have these cultural beliefs, cultural ways of making sense of what is happening to us, right? So I'll tell you one story. I know I'm going to run out of time, but let me tell you this one story, right, about this. I met a woman who has diabetes a number of years ago, right? So she referred to me because somehow people think that I can do magic, right? Because I'm Haitian after all. I must have some voodoo in there somewhere that I'm going to do with her. So they send this woman to me because I'm about to do something magical with her. And when I met with Rose, Rose has been diabetic, and she got diabetes really late in her years, right? But that Rose refuses to take her insulin. And because of that, her sugar level goes up, she goes in the hospital, and then, you can start to see the impact that it's having. But because I've been trained to do cultural work, I asked Rose, how do you think you get diabetes? And Rose said, nobody's ever asked me that question, but I know exactly how I got diabetes. I said, well, yeah, like I know how people get diabetes, but Rose's idea of how she gets diabetes is completely different. Rose said she had an affair. Her husband found out about her affair. And then 7 years from the date the husband found out about the affair, he got, not 7 years, 7 days. He was such a shock that he was diagnosed with a tumor. That his tumor is linked to the fact that he was in shock from learning about this affair she had. Now, 7 years later, her husband died. Okay? And then close to the date he died, according to her, she went to the doctor and found out she has diabetes. See? So Rose's thinking is she has diabetes because God is punishing her for having had an affair that killed her husband. Now, I don't know about your connection to God, but I don't have that kind of power to go against God and my little scientific data on diabetes. You see? So Rose believed God is punishing her for what she did. That's a cultural understanding. That's where her head is. What am I going to use to combat that? There's no way I can say to Rose that you're wrong. God would not punish you in such a way. There's no way I can say to her, no, let me explain to you how diabetes is really manifested, because she's had all of that experience and so forth. You know what did it for Rose? That's what I said to her. I said, Rose, I don't know if what you did caused your husband to have a tumor. I don't know. I don't know if God is punishing you for what you did or not. Here's what I do know. I'm a woman of faith. I believe very strongly in the higher power. And there must be a reason as to why this higher power saw fit to put me and you in the same space. That's what I said to her. And trust me when I tell you this. Rose gets in her knees and starts crying. She says, oh my God, I think God sent you for me. I think God sent you for me to help me through this, and so forth. And that's how Rose and I started working together, right? And now if you tell people, because now Rose is really following up and taking her diabetes, they're like, oh yes, you did do something. Like she's like, Dr. Nicholas is really magical, but not really. Because I'm using Persian cultural piece to be able to understand that. You see that? So there's a part of this case, there's a part of this that you have to understand the cultural nuances. You have to think about the ways that the person may be thinking about their lived experience. Not just about their health, but their education, their economic. Like why Kentucky? Why here? Why do they think? What is their own belief about how they got here in this place versus all other? People have their own belief and stories related to all of that. I want to wrap us up by saying, in the midst of everything that I'm talking about, is that people have strength. And it's our responsibility to also pay attention to the resources and the assets that this person have, that the people have in their lives. We're not the totality of what's wrong with us, right? There are also a lot of great things about this individual and about the case. And how do you pull those out? Right? To understand that in the midst of my demise, in the midst of everything else that's going on for me, I showed up with you. You know what it requires if you're depressed? To get up and go see someone, to put a clothes on and get ready to go meet with someone. Do you know what it requires? That we don't really give a lot of focus on that. So it really is an opportunity for us to think about all of the resources that are also existing, both for the person, but also in their own, right? In their own environment, whether or not it's the organizations that they're part of, but also all of the role, the different social support networks and so forth. I want to wrap us up with this, right? So it's an opportunity for us to remind us of that we are talking about people. And there's a way that sometimes when we are getting cases where we're hearing all of the things that is going on, we forget that there's a person There's a person who's there, and there's a need for me to understand the totality of that person. Imagine if what everybody knew about you was the fact that you were a student here. Would they have got you in totality? Right? How about all the other aspects of your life that also should be a central part of this as well? And so I've talked a lot about all of these. So you have to take the person and you have to situate the person along all of these boxes, right? And say, what do I know about the historical trauma? What do I know about the political landscape? What do I know? What do I know? What do I know? Like, so you force yourself to ask those questions and be able to pull some of the information that one needs, right? But in addition to that, I hope you also pay attention to the fact that this individual also has a lot of assets, right? There's a lot of amazing things that has allowed Haitians to continue to be surviving in a country that seemed to be going through a series of turmoil, right, as well. And what are those things? This sort of cultural resilience. I don't like resilience. I don't use the word resilience at all for lots of reasons. It's just not my favorite word to use because sometimes we think about somebody who's resilient because they made it to the university, but the person who didn't make it to the university is not resilient. Come on now. Of course they're resilient. They just didn't make it to the university, right? But more importantly, I don't use the word resilient because it doesn't allow us to address the structural problem that exists. I don't want Haitians to keep going on being resilient. I want us to address the systemic structural issues that's going on so we can have less resilient people, right, overall. And that's one of the reasons why it's not a big word for me. But also faith and spirituality, which we know is a huge part, right, of our lives. If somebody meets with me and you say you're trying to connect with me and you don't understand the way spirituality shows up in my life, you're missing out of who I am. You don't know me at all because that's such a significant part, right, of my day-to-day life. Families is really, really important, right? We know that, right? This is why everybody's an auntie. Everybody's an uncle, right? And like my kids used to say, how many aunties do I have? Like, how come we keep saying auntie so-and-so? I was like, because they're all our aunties, right? So the idea of both blood and non-blood relatives becomes really, really important. We don't have first cousin, second cousin, we have cousins, right? It doesn't make a difference what order they are in that relationship. So we know that family and that network is important. This idea about this commitment to education, man, you want Haitian and a Haitian woman to move, tell them it's good for their kids, education, and they'll move mountains for that because there's a commitment to this idea that education is a pathway towards economic prosperity, right? As well. So a lot of the sacrifices and the migrations and the issues that you are seeing is related to all of that as well. And then just added a few more of those assets there that is really is important to keep in mind. The last piece is just the idea that Haitians are really is a collective society. What does that mean is that we never show up saying I. Right? It was like my big issue in my doctoral dissertation. I said, we, and my committee says, how many people did this doctoral dissertation with you, right? It's just because we don't speak in the concept of I, right, at all. There's a sense that this idea that whatever is happening to me is impacting everyone else, right? That there's always a need to think about the larger laku, the larger piece as well. And our responsibility is to merge these things. How do we merge the issues that are going on, but also the assets that the person is coming in and bringing into the table as well to help us move forward. So with that, let me just stop here just to see if you have any questions for me before we